Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a story about a remarkably peaceful movement, a historic promise, and the huge challenge of turning words into action. It's really a story about trust, governance, and what happens after the protests stop. So here's the central puzzle we're looking at today. A major agreement was signed, right? It calmed massive social unrest. So, why isn't the crisis over? Why are we still talking about it? Well, because, as you're about to see, a signature is just the beginning of the story, not the end. All right, so how did we even get to this point? Let's rewind. Our story starts in Azad, Jammu, and Kashmir, or AJK. And what's really important to get is that this wasn't some political power play. This was a civic movement. People are calling it one of the most disciplined in recent history, that was just born from years and years of frustration with how things were being run. And the frustration really came from this incredible paradox. Think about it. AJK is a region that generates enormous natural wealth, especially from hydropower. But at the same time, its own people were stuck paying some of the highest electricity prices in the entire country. You've got all this resource wealth, but it just wasn't making its way back to the public. By the middle of 2023, things just hit a breaking point. I mean, can you imagine living right next to a giant dam that powers the whole nation, but you can't even afford to keep the lights on in your own house? For so many families, those skyrocketing electricity bills were simply the last straw.
So the movement that grew out of this had some very specific goals. And this is a really key point. They weren't asking for special treatment or handouts. Their demands were all grounded in their constitutional rights and what the government is supposed to do.
This quote just nails it, really. It wasn't about charity. It was about fairness and justice. The people were basically just asking the state to hold up its end of the deal, based on rights they were already supposed to have.
Now, the full list of demands was pretty long, a 38-point charter to be exact, but you can boil it all down to these three core ideas: justice, economic fairness, and just better, more democratic governance. Nothing too radical, right? Just reasonable expectations. So under that first pillar, justice, the calls were for basic accountability. Things like getting independent investigations into violence that happened during the protests, dropping politically motivated legal cases, and making sure families who suffered losses got compensated transparently. Now, for the economic side of things, this one was huge. The people of AJK wanted the price of their electricity to reflect the fact that the hydropower resources are theirs. It's a principle called net hydro profit, which basically just means they shouldn't be paying some uniform national price that completely ignores how much power their region is actually generating.
And what's amazing is that because these protests were so peaceful, they eventually led to a real breakthrough. Instead of a crackdown, we got a negotiation. It's been called a rare moment of statesmanship, and the result was the Muzaffarabad Agreement.
And here's the date to remember, October 3rd and 4th, 2025. That's when the agreement was officially signed. This was the moment that protest had the chance to become a real partnership, with a clear path forward all laid out on paper. So, why was this such a big deal? Because for the very first time, the state officially said, you know what, your complaints are valid. It also recognized the group leading the protests, the Jammu-Kashmir Joint Awami Action Committee, as a legitimate partner in fixing the problems. That's huge. So the agreement really did four key things. 1, it formally validated the public's grievances. 2, it recognized the civic movement as a legitimate player. 3, it put concrete government promises on paper for justice and energy. And maybe most importantly, it set up a formal system to actually monitor and implement those promises, to make sure they'd be kept. This quote really captures the feeling of that moment perfectly. The agreement wasn't just about ending protests. It was meant to be a permanent bridge, connecting the real-world complaints of the people directly to the government. Okay, so that brings us right to the heart of the matter today. The protests stopped, the deal was signed, hope was in the air, but now we're facing a new, much quieter challenge. The challenge of actually delivering on those promises. I mean, let's not forget why the streets went quiet in the first place. The agreement worked because it gave people hope that their voices were finally heard, and that peaceful, democratic action could actually lead to change. But hope, it's a fragile thing. The main challenge isn't about negotiating anymore. It's about implementation. An agreement on paper is one thing, but it only becomes real when its promises are delivered. And when that delivery stalls, the risks are just massive. Public trust starts to crumble. People begin to wonder, hey, Does this whole peaceful protest thing even work? The government's own credibility takes a hit, and there are even bigger consequences. It gets a lot harder for Pakistan to talk about Kashmiri rights on the world stage if it's not delivering those same rights at home. This is about more than just AJK. It's a test of whether this kind of democratic engagement can really succeed. So that brings us to the final, critical question. What's really at stake here? Right now, this situation is at a crossroads, with two very, very different futures ahead, for both AJK and for Pakistan. And those two futures couldn't be more stark. If the agreement fails, you risk more unrest, a real loss of faith in democracy, and damage to the country's reputation. But if it succeeds, you get stable governance, responsive leaders, and you finally turn protest into a genuine partnership. The choice is pretty clear.
Now, the good news is, a tool was built specifically to make sure this all works out. That monitoring and implementation framework we talked about, it was designed precisely to prevent failure. Making sure that it can actually do its job, openly and transparently, is the most critical step right now.
You know, throughout this whole thing, the people of AJK have shown incredible patience and a real commitment to doing things by the book. Time and again, they've chosen dialogue over disruption. So now, the ball is firmly in the court of the government institutions that have to hold up their end of the bargain.
And so, that's the question we're left with. The people have done their part. They've been calm, they've been lawful, they've been unified. That bridge between grievance and governance has been built. The only question left is, will anyone actually cross it? Will these promises finally become practice?